What is shamanism? Quotes from different books on shamanism. What Dawkins doesn't consider is the possibility that the spirit world, for lack of a better phrase, has used evolution to manifest physical entities in which consciousness can emerge and express itself and learn lessons. What he doesn't consider, in other words, is the possibility that consciousness comes first, while physical realms and beings are manifestations or projections of that primordial consciousness. As above, so below, as many ancient wisdom traditions state. According to these traditions, the world is indeed a theater of experience, and we find ourselves on its stage in order to learn lessons that can only be taught in a physical realm. Moreover, we are enjoined to be aware that we have been given a precious opportunity to be born into this world of matter and consequences as human beings rather than as fruit flies or slime molds or cockroaches or stones. After all, the whole biosphere is here to support us. A doctor who insists on retaining his or her protected role as healthy healer remains separate, defending him or herself against the ultimate helplessness that lurks phantom-like in all of our lives. Cut off from his or her own feelings, such a doctor will not be able to join with the sufferer. Missing will be the crucial collaboration in containing, processing, and integrating the patient's horrible sensations, images, and emotions. The sufferer will remain starkly alone, holding the very horrors that have overwhelmed him and broken down his capacity to self-regulate and grow. In a common therapy resulting from this isolating orientation, the therapist instructs the PTSD victim to assert control over his feelings, to manage his aberrant behaviors, and to alter his dysfunctional thoughts. Contrast this alignment to that of shamanic traditions, where the healer and the sufferer join together to re-experience the terror while calling on cosmic forces to release the grip of the demons. The shaman is always first initiated via a profound encounter with his own helplessness and feeling of being shattered prior to assuming the mantle of a healer.
Interested in an important subgroup, large subgroup of these non-ordinary experiences that have healing potential, that have transformative potential, that have, I believe, evolutionary potential, and also heuristic potential. It means that if we study them or have those experiences personally, we get access to new revolutionary information about the human psyche, about consciousness, and even about the nature of reality. I really believe that if we study these experiences systematically, that it would lead to a revolution in psychology, psychiatry, and psychotherapy that would be comparable to what the physicists went through in the first 3 decades of the 20th century, when they had to go from Newton first to the theories of relativity and then to quantum physics that even Einstein himself was not able to accept until the end of his life. Somehow need to bring those two together and also bring spirituality and science together. So since I haven't found a name for this category of experiences, I decided to actually make one myself and started calling them holotropic. That term is a composite word from Greek, where holos means whole, and trepein means moving in the direction of something. So holotropic means moving toward wholeness. Now, if I say that, I frequently get the response, what do you mean, moving toward wholeness? Aren't we already whole? The way we experience ourselves in our everyday state of consciousness. And I would have to say no. We just experience ourselves as a fragment of who we really are, or a fragment of our experiential potentials. And I usually refer to Hinduism, where in the Upanishads you have the question, who are we? Who are you? And the answer in Sanskrit is Tattvam Asi, which is usually translated in kind of archaic English. Thou art that, or you are it with a capital I, means we are not nama rupa, we are not name and shape. Our deepest identity is with a spark of divine creative energy that we carry in our innermost being. The Hindus call it Atman, and this is not a belief or delusion of the Hindus. This is something that can be pragmatically verified in these holotropic states of consciousness. And if we follow, for example, the different schools of yoga, we all would have the potential to experience that divine core. And when we have that experience, we would recognize that that energy that we carry within is identical with the creative energy that is responsible for the universe. Powerful healing mechanism is something that's actually seen currently as a psychotic experience, which is the experience of cosmic unity, experience of oneness with other people, oneness with nature, oneness with the universe, oneness with the divine. If this experience is supported and is allowed to be completed and integrated, it's much more powerful healing mechanism than anything we have to offer in current psychiatry and psychology. I will just say something about the strategy of self-exploration, psychotherapy. Studies showing that there is really no significant statistical difference between the therapeutic results of these schools. That if anything, the differences are inside of the schools. There are better therapists and not so good therapists inside of the schools, but you cannot say that statistically one school or another offers better results. And some of these studies show that what really works in psychotherapy is something that the therapists usually don't think about, and it's very difficult to put into scientific language, something like the quality of human encounter between the therapist and the client, or the feeling of the client of being unconditionally accepted by another human being, frequently for the first time in their lives, and factors of this kind. So what is the holotropic alternative? It's very interesting. It shows that if you are in a holotropic state of these different categories, I'm not talking just about the breathwork, but all the different categories. If you are in a holotropic state, it mobilizes self-healing mechanism, self-healing potential in the psyche. And when we work with these states, we become more like midwives or co-adventurers. We are not the fixers who come with sort of brilliant insights and interpretations. the interpretations would be for the same thing would be different depending on the school. Whereas in the holotropic states, you just simply support what is happening, and we would support it. We have such trust in the process now that we would support it even if we don't at times understand what is happening. We believe that there is a deeper intelligence that's sort of operating in these states. So what are the experiences that we talk about? This would be experiences that the shamans have during their initiatory crisis, when they have this visionary state that takes them into the underworld. They're exposed to ordeals. They experience dismemberment and death and annihilation, and then psychospiritual rebirth and journey into the supernal realms. And during this journey, they heal themselves from various emotional, psychosomatic, sometimes even physical diseases. The anthropologists call them wounded healers. And not only do they heal themselves, but they learn how to heal others. Mainly working with energy. The idea, like in Chinese medicine, is that blocked energy is conducive to pathology, to disease, and when the vital energies are flowing, it's the best prevention of diseases, and also the best thing that we can do for our healing. Also, the category of experiences that the shamans then induce in their clients or experience themselves when they are healing. They use for their healing practice.
My observations in visiting a few indigenous cultures suggest that this approach has a certain kinship with various traditional shamanic healing rituals. I am proposing that a collective cross-cultural approach to healing trauma not only suggests new directions for treatment, but may ultimately inform a fundamentally deeper understanding of the dynamic two-way communication between mind and body. If trauma is to be transformed, we must learn not to confront it directly. If we make the mistake of confronting trauma head-on, then Medusa will, true to her nature, turn us to stone. Like the Chinese finger traps we all played with as kids, the more we struggle with trauma, the greater will be its grip upon us. When it comes to trauma, I believe that the equivalent of Perseus' reflecting shield is how our body responds to trauma, and how the living body personifies resilience and feelings of goodness. Trauma is a fact of life. It does not, however, have to be a life sentence. It is possible to learn from mythology, from clinical observations, from neuroscience, from embracing the living, experiential body, and from the behavior of animals, and then, rather than brace against our instincts, embrace them with guidance and support. We are capable of emulating animals in learning, like Nancy and I did, to shake and tremble our way back to life. In being able to harness these primordial and intelligent instinctual energies, we can move throughout trauma and transform it. Healing has been hindered by a nomenclature and a paradigm that, in separating the healer from the wounded, denies the universality of our responses to terror and horror, the aspiration to reinvigorate a contemporary approach to healing trauma, requires each of us to connect to our biological commonality as instinctual beings. Thus, we are linked not only by our common vulnerability to fright, but by our innate capacity to transform such experiences. In pursuing this link, we can learn much from mythology and from our animal brethren. It is the weaving together of heroic myth and biology, mythobiology, that will help us comprehend the roots and mysterium, tremendum of trauma. The traditional initiation that young Aqua men and women go through in order to find a guiding vision for their lives. They are given Floripondio medicine by the shaman and put out under a small shelter at the foot of a kapok tree. The medicine makes them blind to our world for 3 days, but opens the doorway to the spirit world of the forest. Throughout this time, they pray to be visited by Arutam, the divine protector of the forest and all who live there. When Arutam comes, he brings the vision that will guide them during the next chapter of their life. How does one become a butterfly? Pooh asks pensively. You must want to fly so much that you are willing to give up being a caterpillar, Piglet replied. By A. Milne.
See, the Maya, this is a personal calendar. How personal can a calendar be? Well, in the Mayan civilization, your first name was the name of the day that you were born. The Maya had this idea that being as you were spiritual, you had a choice of which day you became physical. You actually had a choice. And why would you pick one day over any other day? Probably because you liked it best. Probably because it agreed with your intention for this life and what you planned to demonstrate as your aspect. So every single person born as a Maya came in knowing exactly why they were here. And everyone else in the society knew exactly why they were here. Wouldn't that have saved us a little bit of trouble? In fact, if you do some study, I did do some study of psychology, and if you do some study of inmates, both in prison and in mental institutions, what the whole problem usually boils right down to is that person was never acknowledged for what they came here for. In a lot of cases, they were blamed, or something was, the reason you're here is to make me miserable, that kind of thing. What they didn't get was acknowledged for why they chose to be here. The Mayan civilization ran very successfully for 5,000 years with this information, all the way up until the Catholic Church showed up and completely destroyed their civilization. The Maya are still there, by the way. There's over 8 million Maya who are living in Guatemala and the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. 8 million. They're not extinct. Not a lot of them follow their ancient traditions anymore, but some do.
Teacher plants is the name given in shamanic traditions to entheogens, a particular set of plants that are said to have consciousness and the power to heal and open us up to a direct experience of the divine. They are in no way recreational. They are connected to traditions that go back thousands of years and are often part of initiatory practices. Where used properly and with guidance, they can open the windows of perception so that we can see ourselves and our place more clearly. Like anything, they can be abused, mostly in the way that people become dependent on having as many experiences as possible, rather than integrating what they have been shown into day-to-day life. Shamanism embraces a whole host of practices, in its core intention to remind us of our place in the web of life and our need to live in balance with the seen and unseen forces that shape our universe. Since time immemorial, we humans have been banging drums and going into trance in order to connect with and learn from these elemental forces, whether they are expressed as lightning, the power of the waters or the wind, or the force that keeps the seasons turning. Shamanism doesn't rely on faith, but invites us to learn from direct experience. When I discovered it, I found both a language for my own experience and the methods to deepen it. Hernando Garcia is the unsung Colombian hero in the Curare story, overlooked just like the indigenous masters who taught him and who taught Schultes. Western culture and modern Latin American culture have largely disregarded the knowledge and wisdom of indigenous traditions. Few academics have humbled themselves in order to learn the traditional way alongside Amazonian shamans. Schultes and Garcia respectfully studied with Amazonian masters. Both went on to stellar careers in botany and ethnobotany. Peyote is a sacrament for all. No one church, race, or government can own it. Reverend Emmanuel Trujillo, Peyote Way Church of God. I was still in medical school when I had my first experience with spiritual plant medicine. I entered Peyote Ceremony at the Peyote Way Church of God in Arizona. Peyote has been used as a sacrament at this legally recognized church since its establishment in the late 1970s, where it is experienced in a ceremony known as the Spirit Walk. My first Spirit Walk gave me the strength to complete my medical training. In just one night, Peyote helped me to reconnect. It quieted and opened my mind, helping me to reconnect to everything that was most important to me. Of course, I had more work to do, but Peyote got me back on track. Growing up in Arizona, I had heard a few things about Peyote Cactus. I knew that it was strongly psychoactive, and that it was used as a traditional medicine in certain Native American traditions. In college, I had read about peyote, mezcalito, in Carlos Castaneda's book, The Teachings of Don Juan. This book was my first exposure to the idea of working with a plant spirit as an ally. This idea appealed to me. I decided to give peyote a try. During my third year in medical school, I found an opportunity to participate in Peyote Ceremony. I had been learning about a renaissance in psychedelic research from my good friend and classmate Barak. He had entered medical school with the intention of doing research on altered states of consciousness, in particular on those induced by meditation and psychedelics. This seemed crazy, particularly at our generally conservative institution. But times are changing, and he pulled it off. Early psychedelic research started in 1943 with the accidental discovery of LSD by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann. Subsequent research led to the chemical isolation of psilocybin from magic mushrooms, traditionally utilized by Mazatec shamans in southern Mexico. Research on these psychedelic substances and others played a pivotal role in understanding the activity of neurotransmitters in the human brain. Neurotransmitters like serotonin, for example, are molecular messengers that help nerve cells in the brain communicate with one another. Neurotransmitters are the current focus of modern psychopharmacology and most psychiatric pharmaceutical treatment. After 3 decades of promising research, in the late 1960s, clinical research into psychedelic medicine was brought to an abrupt stop. By then, LSD had developed its reputation as a party drug among the hippies. It was being sold on the streets, and the establishment had become uncomfortable with its disruptive influence. By 1968, possession of most psychedelics had become illegal in the United States. Clinical research was halted, despite promising evidence that substances like LSD and MDMA, ecstasy, Molly, could be used in the treatment of addiction and deep psychological trauma. Early psychedelic research had advanced our understanding of the mood-altering serotonin, also known as 5-hydroxytryptamine or 5-HT, system and its role in psychology. The serotonin system, the network of brain cells that relies most heavily on the neurotransmitter serotonin. Official scientific research into the activity of these psychoactive substances began again in the 1990s. In 1991, Dr. Rick Strassman was the first investigator to gain permission from the DEA to reopen psychedelic research with his DMT study at the University of New Mexico. Since that time, science and medicine have been taking a second look at psychedelics. The DEA has since granted further research exemptions, allowing for a growing number of investigations and clinical trials in the United States. These studies and research abroad have shown great promise in the treatment of a number of mental health problems, including PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction, anxiety, and depression. While psychedelics are outlawed, 27 million Americans currently take antidepressants such as Zoloft or Prozac. These days, most people are far more suspicious of plant compounds safely ingested by human beings for tens of thousands of years than they are of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, or other powerful, utterly synthetic mood and mind-altering drugs created in the last decades by a pharmacological industry motivated by profit. Antidepressants fit our society's underlying biases. Psychedelics emphatically do not. Is it possible that we have demonized hallucinogens because we fear the contents of our own minds? The visionary power of psychedelics remains a mystery, one that was abandoned by the Scientific Academy when psychedelics were made illegal a generation ago. Equally mysterious, why should the private exploration of one's inner reality by chemical or other means be considered a serious threat to a free society? In the long trip, a study of visionary drug use through history, Paul Devereux muses, I sometimes wonder if our culture, acting in the manner of a single organism, in the way a crowd of people or a classroom of students sometimes can, somehow senses a deep threat to its own philosophical foundations residing in the psychedelic experience. This might help account for the otherwise irrational hatred and repression of the use of hallucinogens, and the smirking dismissal of the psychedelic experience as a trivial one by so many of our intellectuals. It is the nature of repression to be invisible. Something that is repressed can't reveal itself to us, can't appear as a break in our awareness. Then we would see its workings, and the repression would be dispelled. In a world of information overload and perpetual destruction, repression manifests as a dismissive giggle, a yawn of boredom, a sin of omission. Repression is reflexive, notes the literary critic Frederick Jameson. That is, it aims not only at removing a particular object from consciousness, but also, and above all, at doing away with the trace of that removal as well, at repressing the very memory of the intent to repress. For over 30 years, a tremendous force of cultural repression has been exerted on the subject of psychedelics. The self-enclosed logic of secular materialism denies any independent existence to the soul, attributing all facets of the human personality to the synaptical wiring of the brain. Psychedelics indicate that this is not the whole story. Especially the lightning strike of dimethyltryptamine, DMT, a chemical produced by our own bodies and by many plants. Smoking DMT is like being shot from a cannon into another dimension and returning to this world in less than 10 minutes. The DMT revelation strongly suggests that the psyche cannot be reduced to a manifestation of our physical hardware. Carl Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls. Is it possible that our society has built up a vast edifice of technology and propaganda in order to avoid that inner confrontation? In chronic diseases in which the emotional body is ill, lasting healing will not be achieved until we address the needs of the heart and soul. One of the most profound ways I have found to achieve this is in Ayahuasca ceremony, within the context of the responsible practice of traditional Amazonian plant medicine. Traditional medical philosophies like Shamanism describe the presence of an emotional body, through which we experience emotion and feeling. Modern science has also encountered this emotional body and is now able to describe its anatomy, a complex network that connects our psychology, our nervous system, our endocrine system, and our immune system. Emotional trauma and spiritual wounds impair this network and in turn compromise health. The shamans have long known that when the emotional body is sick, the physical body cannot get well. Shamanic plant medicine gives us access to the mystical realms of the spirit, where we can find and heal these deeper wounds and release emotional burdens. Thus, emotional health returns, and along with it, our innate ability to heal mind and body. Too often, the Western medical approach fails to address the emotional and spiritual dimensions of these chronic diseases and related illnesses, seeing them only as physical conditions. Shamanic plant medicine heals by going deeper into the emotional and spiritual realms. Like other forms of spiritual healing, it works by altering our consciousness. As suggested by author Stephen Booner, the mind is opened beyond the illusory limits of its current operating software. The mind is opened to the heart and to the energies that disturb our emotional being. Shamanic plant medicine and related spiritual techniques can help to heal many modern maladies and diseases, from post-traumatic stress disorder to chronic cough, to Crohn's disease, to anxiety and depression, to a number of other psychosomatic conditions. Emotional disturbance can dysregulate the autonomic nervous system. How stress impairs and confuses the body's immune apparatus. It follows that a regaining of emotional balance, the working out of past trauma, and connection with our deeper humanity should and can have powerfully beneficial physiological effects. Such experiential transformation, if genuine, can powerfully affect the hormonal apparatus, the nervous and immune systems, and all organs such as the brain, the gut, and the heart. Hence, ayahuasca's potential healing capacity. Reconnecting to your bodily senses also involves reconnecting the mind to your internal sensations, how you feel inside your body, your heart, your gut, and throughout. This sense is called interoception. We experience our emotions through these sensations. These internal sensations also inform us about the physiologic condition of our body. Again, we remember ourselves. The new science of epigenetics has shown that emotional stressors can have negative effects on gene functioning, effects that are transmittable even to future generations. Tafur also speculates quite plausibly that positive experiences can help to reverse such changes, or indeed induce positive changes in gene activity. I realized that if I wasn't prepared to be disliked, to challenge our apprentices and to use my power in the service of life, how could I teach? How could I heal? How could I really be the shaman that my teachers had told me I was? In those weeks in the Amazon, I felt as if I was being energetically torn to pieces again and again, and again and again, with the help of my maestros and the medicine spirits. I returned to that battleground to face my demons. Brutal as this initiation was, I was utterly grateful to the strength of the forest and its medicines for showing me who I was and showing me that it was both my choice and my responsibility to decide how to use my power. I was here in the middle of the Amazon learning old-school shamanism from two of the strongest men I've ever met. Did I think I didn't want power? Yes, I wanted power. Yes, I was ambitious. And yes, I fully owned my potential to do harm. I knew that only in recognizing and experiencing this on all levels would I ever be able to genuinely and wholly make a different choice. This was the key for me. In seeing this pattern in myself, I understood why so many great teachers seem to create such chaos around themselves. They would show up, put on their beautiful spiritual face and get other people to do their dirty work and create their boundaries for them. And in this way, they would create an impossible ideal for their followers to live up to. Unowned shadows have a habit of popping up in the organizations and followers of charismatic leaders. And unowned shadows can be very destructive to everyone involved. For years, I'd been told that my lust for power was the problem. I'd believed it and done everything I could to force a little humility into my vocabulary. Trying to impose an idea of humility on top of the fear of power is a recipe for disaster. And it was here in the Amazon that I got to the root of it. The danger for me was not owning my power. Trying to squeeze myself into an acceptable self dictated by others' ideas about me had literally put me out of shape. I laid down my true power and was therefore open to attack. But worse, in my denial of who I was a far more dangerous human being, trying to be a nice guy, never drawing a clear line and always smiling. A little spiritual smile had built up a pressure in me that was inevitably.
In the 19th century, a statue of Ho Chi Minh was discovered at the base of a mountain in present-day Mexico. The statue appeared to depict the flower prince in a meditative position, his face in a state of ecstatic bliss. The statue was adorned in carvings of plants that were sacred to the Aztecs. Among these were tobacco, and psilocybin mushrooms, both of which are widely used to this day. In fact, every plant engraved into the statue is thought to have had a spiritual context in Aztec culture. This is exactly why they made their way onto the statue in the first place. Take, for instance, Olelacqui, which contains LSA, a naturally occurring chemical relative of LSD. Morning Glories, too, contain lysergic acid in its seeds, which are known to have been ground with mortar and pestle in Aztec civilization, after which the ground seeds were brewed in water, filtered, and ultimately drank, causing psychedelic visions. The Florentine Codex is a first-hand account of what was then referred to as New Spain. Its author, a Franciscan monk, described a detailed ethnography of the Aztec culture, including their history, religion, economics, society, and even ritual practices. Among these was the use of Olelacqui. He who eats it, who drinks it, sees many things which greatly terrify him. He is really frightened by the poisonous serpent which he sees for that reason. Florentine Codex, Book 11. The Florentine Codex makes reference to nearly all of the entheogenic plants depicted on the Flower Princess statue. Of psilocybin, the friar wrote, "The first thing to be eaten at a feast were small mushrooms that bring on drunkenness, hallucinations, and even lechery. They ate these before the dawn with honey. And when they began to feel the effects, they began to dance, some sang and others wept. When the drunkenness of the mushroom had passed, they spoke with one another of the visions they had seen." Not depicted on the statue of the Flower Prince, it is worth mentioning that the Florentine Codex estimates the use of peyote to go back to approximately 300 BC. It is now generally regarded to be closer to 1000 BC, over 3,000 years from present day. Peyote was not native to regions of Mexico in which the Aztecs lived. For this reason, it has been suggested that they received peyote by trade with other Mesoamerican people. Sahagún believed that peyote is what allowed the Aztec warriors to fight the way they did. Conquistadors defeated the Aztecs in 1521. They put a stop to the use of all non-alcohol intoxicants. They associated the use of entheogens with witchcraft and even cannibalism, and wanted to spread Christianity to these people that they believed to be savages. As a result, the use of datura, an intoxicant at high doses and a delirium at lower doses, as well as psilocybin, peyote, and the like, needed to go underground.
The Gregorian calendar, if you studied history, you know that the Gregorian calendar did not go down very easily with indigenous people. The Gregorian calendar went out with the Spanish and with the Catholic bishops, and they conquered lands and then told people what day it was. Most civilizations already had their own calendar, see? And then these guys come along and say, no. This is the day. It didn't go down very easy. They had to kill millions and millions of people to get them to follow this Gregorian calendar. And what this Gregorian calendar was all about was the physical measurement of our orbit. And it turns out that this is a very, very insidious tool. You probably never thought that a calendar could be so evil. But what this calendar has done is it has pinned our civilization's consciousness to physical evidence only. The absolute dead center of our civilization is focused on only physical evidence. The measurement of physical objects moving through space. That's why it's not Year of Our Lord anymore, because there has been a steady erosion of our consciousness of things other than physical. Remember, we used to have religious holidays like Christmas and Easter. Have you noticed that a really good Christmas now is a whole lot of stuff sold to a whole lot of people? Same with Easter. It's a buying, marketing frenzy, isn't it? Especially in the cities, huh? There has been a steady erosion of our consciousness of things other than physical because our calendar has directed our consciousness only in that direction. That is insidious.
So I think then it's not just an indictment of the Gregorian calendar as such, because other solar calendars or lunar calendars that are used in some cultures that the same. It's based, if it's based on the cycles of the moon, it's just as physical, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
An Islamic calendar or Jewish calendar that are lunar, are they just as bad then for that?
They are, but not as concentrated.
Why is the solar calendar worse then?
This particular calendar is worse because now this calendar has been adopted as the commerce calendar. It's the calendar on which all things are bought and sold. Every computer is programmed with this calendar. To a certain degree, all those other calendars were physical calendars. They have all gone into less and less use, haven't they? Because they had some spiritual aspects to them. And because they did, they were shunned. They were thrown away. It was all narrowed down to this is the calendar and this is the day. You know what the word dogma means? Anybody out there know what the word dogma means? Doesn't sound like a good word, does it? The word means unquestioned belief. Dogma. Doesn't sound very healthy. You know what the biggest dogma is on earth? What day it is. Nobody even questions it. And if they should, that person's crazy. Yeah, this is a really powerful tool to dominate people's consciousness, which is senior to their body, and it is senior to their actions. You see, there is a cascade of event. It goes like this: consciousness, then light, then thought, then action. Consciousness first, then light, then thought, then the event. In every case, in all ways. So, you control somebody's consciousness, you got them. Soul, mind, and body, you got them. So, here we are, all of us from birth, including our parents and our grandparents from birth, all of us have been brainwashed with this focus. Every one of us, me too, every one of us has been brainwashed.
And remained so for centuries. Their religion also was banned and systematically replaced.
While most of what became known as witchcraft was invented by Christians, certain elements of witchcraft did represent an older pagan tradition. Witchcraft was linked and even considered to be synonymous was divination, which means not only the art of foretelling the future, but also the discovery of knowledge by the aid of supernatural power. It suggests that there is such power available, something Orthodox Christians insisted could only be the power of the devil, for God was no longer to be involved with the physical world. The word witch comes from the Old English wicke and wicca, meaning the male and female participants in the ancient pagan tradition which holds masculine, feminine, and earthly aspects of God in great reverence. Rather than a God which stood above the world, removed from ordinary life, divinity in the Wiccan tradition was understood to imbue both heaven and earth. This tradition also recalled a period when human society functioned without hierarchy, either matriarchal or patriarchal, and without gender, racial, or strict class rankings. It was a tradition that affirmed the potential for humanity to live without domination and fear. Nevertheless, the belief in magic was still so prevalent in the 14th century that the Council of Chartres ordered anathema to be pronounced against sorcerers each Sunday in every church. It took the church a long time to persuade society that women were inclined toward evil witchcraft and devil worship, reversing its policy of denying the existence of witches. In the 13th century, the church began depicting the witch as a slave of the devil. No longer was she or he to be associated with an older pagan tradition. No longer was the witch to be thought of as benevolent healer, teacher, wise woman, or one who accessed divine power. She was now to be an evil satanic agent. The witch hunts. Again, such hierarchy was entirely a projection of the church that bore no resemblance to ancient paganism. By recognizing both masculine and feminine faces of God, and by understanding God to be infused throughout the physical world, the Wiccan tradition had no need to strict hierarchical rankings. Pope John XII formalized the persecution of witchcraft in 1320, when he authorized the Inquisition to prosecute sorcery. Thereafter, papal bulls and declarations grew increasingly vehement in their condemnation of witchcraft and of all those who made a pact with hell. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII issued the bull Summis Desiderantes, authorizing two inquisitors, Kramer and Sprenger, to systematize the persecution of witches. 2 years later, their manual, Malleus Maleficarum, was published with 14 editions following between 1487 to 1520, and at least 16 editions between 1574 to 1669. A papal bull in 1488 called upon the nations of Europe to rescue the Church of Christ, which was imperiled by the arts of Satan. The papacy and the Inquisition had successfully transformed the witch from a phenomenon whose existence the Church had previously rigorously denied into a phenomenon that was deemed very real, very frightening. The antithesis of Christianity and absolutely deserving of persecution. It was now heresy not to believe in the existence of witches. The 18th century founder of Methodism, John Wesley, declared to those skeptical of witchcraft, "The giving up of witchcraft is in effect the giving up of the Bible." And an eminent English lawyer wrote, "To deny the possibility, nay, actual existence of witchcraft and sorcery is at once flatly to contradict the revealed word of God in various passages both of the Old and New Testament." The persecution of witchcraft enabled the Church to prolong the profitability of the Inquisition. The Inquisition had left regions so economically destitute that the Inquisitor Emeric complained, "In our days there are no more rich heretics. It is a pity that so salutary an institution as ours should be so uncertain of its future." By adding witchcraft to the crimes it persecuted, however, the Inquisition exposed a whole new group of people from whom to collect money. It took every advantage of this opportunity. The author Barbara Walker notes, "Victims were charged for the very ropes that bound them and the wood that burned them. Each procedure of torture carried its fee. After the execution of a wealthy witch, officials usually treated themselves to a banquet at the expense of the victim's estate." In 1592, Father Cornelius Loos wrote, "Wretched creatures are compelled by the severity of the torture to confess things they have never done. And so by the cruel butchery innocent lives are taken." Witches were held accountable for nearly every problem. Any threat to social uniformity, any questioning of authority, and any act of rebellion could now be attributed to and prosecuted as witchcraft. Not surprisingly, areas of political turmoil and religious strife experienced the most intense witch hunts. Witch hunting tended to be much more severe in Germany, Switzerland, France, Poland, and Scotland than in more homogeneously Catholic countries such as Italy and Spain. Witch hunters declared that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. In 1661, Scottish royalists proclaimed that rebellion is the mother of witchcraft. And in England, the Puritan William Perkins called the witch the most notorious traitor and rebel that can be. For tribes in Africa, Siberia, North and South America, and many other regions, rejection of the visionary knowledge offered by the botanical world would be a form of insanity. I went through a VT initiation, eating iboga, a psychedelic root bark that induces a trance lasting for 30 hours. Some of the VT call this ceremony breaking open the head. The bark powder temporarily releases the soul from the body, allowing the initiate entry into the African spiritual cosmos, where he is shown the outline of his fate. The word psychedelic, mind manifesting, was coined in the 1950s during our culture's brief enthusiasm for chemical self-discovery. The term itself is a bit vague, as the entire set of these substances tends to escape precise classification. In this book, I have, for the most part, limited my discussion to traditional and well-known visionary catalysts, including psilocybin containing mushrooms, peyote, the Amazonian potion, ayahuasca, LSD, iboga, and dimethyltryptamine, DMT. I have also looked into a few recent discoveries. Most psychedelics are neither physically harmful or habit-forming, yet they are considered so frightening and dangerous that possession of them is punished by long prison sentences. Although they were once thought to expand consciousness, which sounds at least theoretically desirable, no sane adult can be allowed legal access to them.